Good evening, friends, and welcome to this episode on the Watchdog of the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News. Think like Neanderthal, friends, and think over and against those people who are deciding that they want to take away our freedoms and take away what has been traditionally a free and honest culture. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times. I want to say hello to everybody who is in the live chat. I'm not sure everybody who is there at the moment, but shalom's to you, and thank you very much for being here. Ooh, excuse me. We are going to start trying to do these Watchdogs at noon every day, or not every day, every Tuesday and Thursday. Mountain time. Today, 25 minutes late. That's partially because I'm not used to being up at noon. I actually get virtually no sleep at all. So it's not so much that I sleep in as much as it is that I stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning. And in doing so, I'm doing a lot of writing, a lot of studying, stuff like that. But nevertheless, it means that waking up at 12, I've actually only gotten like 5-7 hours of sleep. At any rate, we are going to try and make sure we're doing this every Tuesday, every Thursday, 12 p.m. Mountain Time, because really that kind of consistency is just what's necessary in order to make a channel like this and a show like this popular. So hope you guys are enjoying what we have here. Somebody in the comment section asked if we have two different cameras. No, we do not. So here, I'll briefly share screen so you can kind of see. Now, if you look here in that little square, you'll see that the camera is very clear, right? Because it is actually my normal webcam camera. The reason it's not so clear here is because if you can tell, there's kind of a spotlight that is on the screen, sort of showing, what's here on the screen. And that does make it a little bit more, I don't know if opaque is the right word, but it does make it a little bit more, not quite as clear, right? So it's the same camera, but because of that spotlight, there's kind of a filter effect whenever I have something here in the big, the big square rather than the little square here. This was all designed by my good friend Nicholas, by the way. Anyways, that's not why you guys came here, right? So let me go ahead and get right into some of the channel housekeeping and stuff like that. So if you like this show, please remember to like and share this program. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Please do consider joining us on Rumble. I suspect that this channel will have a limited shelf life on YouTube. I actually have been censored before because conservative political talking points are not something that YouTube appreciates very much, and the overlords definitely don't like to see channels like this get big. So yes, at the moment, we only have 77 subs, and at the moment, our videos rarely crack even 40 views, right? But that hasn't stopped us from being censored already. So, if this show ever becomes somewhat successful, which, Lord willing, that will be the case, it's going to be even worse than that, right? It's going to be even worse than that. So please do consider getting a Rumble account and following us on Rumble as well. Everything is posted there after the fact, but nevertheless, everything is posted there. We used to post to Daily Motion as well, but unfortunately, Daily Motion is just terrible. It's just not a good website at the moment. I mean, no disrespect to them. Hopefully they get their stuff in order at some point in their lives, their digital lives, right? But nevertheless, it's a terrible website. So right now we're on Rumble. So please do get a Rumble account. Follow the Synagogue on Rumble. It is just the Synagogue, not the Synagogue News. I know some of you who watch both of my channels will say, well, hey, that doesn't make any sense. The Synagogue is your apologetics channel. Yeah, I know. Originally, it was going to be a partner channel to that channel. And then I decided to make it a partner channel to this channel. And Rumble did not give me the opportunity to actually change the name. So that's the story behind that, right? Not that you guys care. But anyways, follow the Synagogue on Rumble to make sure that you are always getting this content. Also, if you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, you can do so. I am on Gab, Parler, Truth Social, Facebook, Minds, and Twitter at the tag The Synagogue. If you're interested in following us on any of those different platforms, first off, definitely consider sharing this video to those platforms. But secondly, do consider following us there. And I certainly appreciate anybody who's giving that kind of support. Also, if you would like to contribute to what we do here financially, you can do so. There are a couple different ways you can do that. The first way is by PayPal. If you want to give a one-time donation to our PayPal to help with the journalism work that we're doing here, I certainly do appreciate that. You can also help by giving a donation to our Patreon. Now, the Patreon I use for this channel does actually come with a perk, which is that I write a blog, a political blog, of course, because this is a political channel. But nevertheless, Bloglodite is the name, and it is currently hosted by Patreon. So if you'd like to give $10 monthly, you will receive access to the Bloglodite blog. It is a bi-weekly publication. So basically, I publish on that blog. I've been trying to mess around with where exactly I want to schedule it. I'm going to start doing it every other Friday, and it'll be alternating with my video blogs that I have on the other channel. So if you guys are familiar with the other channel, I know at least some of the people who watch this are. On the other channel, I do a video blog that's called Breakfast Tea. That's bi-weekly every other Wednesday, right? So basically, the way it's going to work is Breakfast Tea on Wednesday. Next week, Friday, Bloglodite. Next week, Wednesday, Breakfast Tea. Next week, Friday, blog, right? So they're alternating with each other, thus giving me plenty of time to write the scripts for Breakfast Tea as well as the actual blog entries for Bloglodite, right? But nevertheless, if you guys are interested in my political blog, you can contribute to the Patreon. So $10 monthly, and I have those blogs coming up. So if anybody's interested in that, not a whole lot as far as channel announcements. There's not much that goes on this particular show quite yet because we're not popular quite yet, but hopefully we'll get there. I do, just as much as I want to make apologetics and theology a full-time job, I do also want to make journalism and political punditry a full-time job. So hopefully we'll be able to do both, right? That is the goal. But nevertheless, that kind of suffices for channel housekeeping today. Oh, there is one other thing, actually. I like to do a little this day in history on each of these watchdogs. Hang on one second. Ooh, excuse me. Man. Not good. Not good. Oh, my goodness. Sorry. That's super weak to have on a program like this. I need to get a freaking Kleenex. 1 second. If you ever had any doubts to the fact that we're live, that will definitely be removed at some point later on. But if you ever had any doubts, now hopefully you don't. Jeez, man. At any rate, so where was I? Yes. This day in history fun fact. So, on this day in history, Sir Thomas More, who was a spiritual advisor to the King of England, specifically Henry VIII, the one who had established the Church of England, Sir Thomas More actually resigned on May 16th, 1532. For the most part, that had a lot to do with the fact that the English Reformation was about to begin, kind of, sort of. The English Reformation was very weird in that when the Church of England actually split from the Roman Catholic Church, it was still pretty Catholic, right? When Queen Elizabeth would reign later on, it would start to become a lot more Protestant. 39 articles were published. It started to become a much more Calvinist, have a much more Calvinistic theology and become much more of a Protestant body, affirming things like sola fide, sola scriptura, etc. But nevertheless, it still did have issues with the Catholic Church even at the very beginning, sort of. The big theological difference between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church at the beginning actually had to do with translations of the Bible. King Henry VIII wanted to have a liturgy and a translation of the Bible in English, right, so that the common people could actually understand their scriptures as well as their liturgy. Roman Catholic Church, even to this day, does not have common tongue liturgies, and it does publish common tongue Bibles, but somewhat begrudgingly after having lost that particular fight, right? They prefer their Bibles to be read in Latin, and their liturgy is always read in Latin. Although traditional Latin Mass has recently had a little bit of a fight against it by some of the progressives who were in the church. So that was the big contribution as far as actual theology that King Henry VIII was making. But nevertheless, he did, of course, split from the church because he wanted his divorce, right? Everybody knows the story. And Thomas More, being a Roman Catholic, I guess I don't know what exactly he would be. I don't think he was a priest, now that I'm thinking about it. But he was a Roman Catholic, a devout Roman Catholic. And he has actually, in fact, been sainted since. He's sainted actually in 1935 by Pope Pius XI. And he's actually became the patron saint of statesmen, which is just another word for politician, in 2000 under the episcopate of Pope John Paul II. He was executed actually by King Henry VIII for his, for his kind of like, I don't know what you say, rebellion, I guess. It's weird because King Henry VIII was a devout Catholic for most of his life, and then he wanted a divorce, and then all of a sudden he wasn't a devout Catholic, but his theology was still Catholic, and he still considered himself Catholic. He just thought that the Pope was out of order, even though the Pope was only telling him he couldn't get a divorce. So really, did he think the Pope was out of order, or did he just not really appreciate the fact that he couldn't get a divorce, right? It's kind of ridiculous, kind of stupid, but nevertheless, Thomas More didn't appreciate that, and Thomas More was executed by King Henry VIII. He had some famous last words to say, "I die the king's good servant and God's first," which, to be fair, while I certainly disagree with his Roman Catholicism as well as his Renaissance style humanism, he definitely did die, true to his beliefs, which is admirable. Nevertheless, the whole point of me starting all of this, by the way, he famously wrote the book Utopia, which is where we get the word utopia. Read it. It's horrifying. It's basically dystopian fiction, but he thought of it as a really super cool thing, which is just hilarious to think about. But nevertheless, all this started because May the 16th, 1532 is the day that he officially resigns from being a spiritual advisor to the king, right? So, yeah, that's your this day in history fact. His specific title was Lord Chancellor of Great Britain. So he resigns from being Lord Chancellor of Great Britain on this day, 1532, which was, let's see, that'd be 491 years ago. Yeah? Yeah, 491 years ago. At any rate, let's get right into our news stories for today. We're actually going to be covering the same story over and over and over again, which is Christianity in the Holy Land. Is it under duress? I am here to tell you that yes, it is under duress. Now, I want to be perfectly clear when I say this. Some of you may know, some of you may not. I am not only Jewish, but an ardent Zionist, an ardent nationalist, in fact. I firmly believe in what I've called unationalism or omninationalism, which is to say nationalism for all nations whenever practicable and reasonable, right? I believe that each ethnos does have, I wouldn't use the word entitled because I don't really think anybody's entitled to anything, but do have a God-given right to self-determination in their own homeland. What does that mean? It means that they have the right to have their own established nations, nation states, independent of any other nation states, in their own homelands whenever practicable. And I have to add whenever practicable because, unfortunately, history is complicated and it's just not really possible for the Pawnee Indian tribe to have an independent nation in modern-day Iowa, right? It's just not going to happen, unfortunately. But whenever we can have a nation being independent in its own homeland, I think that it is a good thing for that to occur, and that includes Native Americans, by the way. I do think Native Americans are deserving of a homeland. I have pretty controversial views when it comes to this. I do believe, like I said, Native Americans should have a homeland. I'm pretty well supportive of Hawaiian sovereignty, and I also am not entirely opposed to some of the different secessionist groups in the United States, specifically those that come from the American South, the state of Texas, Cascadia, and so on, right? Even California once attempted to secede, and I'm not necessarily opposed. I think people do have a right to self-governance in that sense, right? Especially if it can be established that they have a distinct ethnos, which means ethnic group of some kind. Doesn't necessarily have to be ethnic, but a distinct nation of some kind, separated from the rest. So because of that, what falls into that purview? Zionism. So I am very much a Zionist. I am very much of the belief that the nation of Israel has a right to exist in Israel. So-called West Bank, which is actually properly referred to as Judea and Samaria, is Israeli land. The Gaza Strip is Israeli land. And frankly, I do also believe in the right of conquest, so the Golan Heights are Israeli land. If you don't want to lose your land to the Israelis, then don't attack them, and maybe they won't be taking your land, right? So I'm pretty radical when it comes to this position, right? And I wear that on my sleeve. I very much do not care what other people have to say about that because, frankly, I believe that I'm right. That being said, excuse me. I also believe in human rights. I also believe in the scripture. I am a pacifist wherever I can be, right? I like peace. Peace is good. Peace means people aren't dying in the streets. Peace means no collateral damage. Collateral damage is an inherent part of war that you cannot avoid. So it's nice to not go to war, right? It's nice to not unnecessarily oppress a group just because it's your country. I believe the Irish have a right to Ireland. Does that mean they have a right to oppress the English who live there? No. No, it doesn't, right? Be a good neighbor. I think there was a famous teacher, you may or may not know his name, who said, love your neighbor as you love yourself, and that this was one half of what hung on the law, being the law of God. I don't know. I think I've heard that from somebody. Maybe you don't recall, but I'm fairly certain a pretty wise, omnipotent being actually claimed that when he was incarnate here on earth. I don't know. So even though I am definitely a Zionist, even though I'm strongly supportive of the Jewish people's right to exist and the Jewish nation's right to exist, in Israel, when they start doing things that are oppressive, that are vile, that are coming against not just the gospel, but also particular ethnic groups that don't happen to be Jewish, I am certainly going to be one to call them out on it. And that is precisely what at least some in the Israeli government are doing in the state of Israel to this day. Now, what you need to know is that Messianic Jews in Israel are not actually considered Jews under Israeli law, okay? There's a real weird dynamic when it comes to being a Jewish person where rabbis can decide whether or not you're actually a part of that ethnic group based on things like matrilineal lineage, and based on things like your personal religious preferences. It's never consistent, right? Benjamin Netanyahu is an atheist, yet for some reason he's considered a Jew. But Dr. Michael Brown is a Christian, and therefore he's not considered a Jew. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. The only reason that the only coherent thought there is we hate Christianity, right? Nevertheless, Messianic Jews are already not considered not considered Jews under current Israeli law, even though they literally are. It's an ethnic group distinction. It'd be like Irish people saying that Protestant Irish are not actually Irish. Completely absurd. Okay. On top of that, already existing, minor thus far, but nevertheless still existing religious persecution that does exist in the Holy Land, there is also nefarious elements of the current Israeli state which wish to start punishing Gentile Christians in the Holy Land as well. They want to make public displays of Christianity illegal. They want to make Public celebration of Christian holidays, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, etc., illegal. They want to make proselytizing, evangelizing illegal. They want to make it to where you can't bring outside religious figures into the country. So say some person down there, say I become fluent in Hebrew, and some Christian down in Israel wants to have me speak there on, I don't know, the Exodus, right? Or on Lordship salvation, or why Calvinism is true, or why Jesus is the Messiah, the big one, right? There are elements of the Israeli government that want to make that illegal, okay? Thus far, it hasn't happened. But thus far, there are increasing supports for this in the government, because those of a slightly more moderate but nevertheless deeply conservative tone, who I agree with, by the way, which is what makes this such a dicey issue. You want the conservatives in power, and yet it's the conservatives that are doing this, okay? They are acquiescing to these far-right fringe groups who are saying, hey, we are a Jewish state, so this needs to be run by Orthodox Jewish law, and that includes banning of proselytizing and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get into this so you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And you will see it's not a pretty picture, though it's not quite a violent picture yet either. We're not there yet. I, for one, think we may get there, especially with Messianic Jews. It only takes one diabolical leader of Israel for Messianic Jews to start to be persecuted to a very severe extent. And I think that absolutely will happen. Like I said, they're already not considered Jews under Israeli law. If you are a Jew who converts to Messianic Judaism, which is Christianity, by the way, you are still considered a Jew then because you were born a Jew. But your children will not be considered Jews, nor will they be considered citizens of the state of Israel. Even though, like I said, the current prime minister is an atheist. You can be an atheist and a Jew. That's perfectly fine. Square that circle for me. But you can't be a Christian and a Jew. And similar persecutions, though not quite as severe, do exist as it pertains to the Karaite Jews as well. Karaite Jews are considered Jews under Jewish law. They're not considered Jews by the rabbinate. And the rabbinate does have a lot of control over Jewish law, so it's possible that the Karaite Jews could end up being pushed farther to the fringes than they already are, back where they used to be before the 1980s. Anyways, let's go ahead and get right into some of the articles we have here today. Unfortunately, a lot of the articles that we're going to be reading today are going to come from less than savory sources, because of the fact that, for the most part, conservatives, like myself, are supportive of Israel. Like myself, I want to make that clear. This isn't some anti-Zionist diatribe, right? Because of that fact, though, you tend to get most of this information from left-wing news sources. Now, this information has been vetted. We know it to be true. Benjamin Netanyahu has even made speeches on this kind of thing. And Benjamin Netanyahu's speeches are often in English, if not translated into English. He's actually a pretty well-spoken English speaker, but nevertheless. So you can find these, is my point. So just know that I don't necessarily agree with everything that these certain papers come out with. Anyways, this is from The Guardian, and it is actually quoting the patriarchate in, specifically the Catholic patriarchate in Israel. Christians are in danger under Israeli government, says Holy Land Patriarch. Again, Christians are in danger under Israeli government, says Holy Land Patriarch. This originally comes from The Guardian. The writer of this article is not named, but it does say Associated Press in Jerusalem, as you can see right here. Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing policies are emboldening attacks, on 2,000-year-old community, says Catholic regional leader. Now, again, obviously we are not supportive of the Catholic Church, but that's hardly relevant to what we are here to discuss today. Just because we don't agree with your religious persuasions does not mean that we think you should be persecuted. In fact, I think I could boldly say that God does not agree with your persecutions. This is not a religious program, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But suffice it to say, I don't think God wants Christians going around persecuting non-Christians, whether that be Catholics, Muslims, Jews, etc. And I don't think he wants Jews doing the same either. I think people should have to come to Christ by their own conscience or not at all. And likewise, if Judaism were true, which obviously I don't believe it is, but if Judaism were true, people should have to come to that persuasion by their own conscience, by the force of their own conscience, not by outside persecutions. At any rate, let's get right into this. So Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing policies are emboldening attacks on 2,000-year-old community, says Catholic regional leader. This, of course, is that Catholic regional leader. His name is Pier Battista Pizzaballa. I probably said that wrong, but nevertheless, Pier Battista Pizzaballa. And he is the leader of the Catholic Church in the Diocese of the Catholic Church in Israel. Okay? So let's hear what he has to say. The head of the Roman Catholic Church in the Holy Land has warned in an interview that Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government has made life worse for Christians in the birthplace of Christianity. The Vatican-appointed Latin Patriarch, Pier Battista Pizzaballa, said that the region's 2,000-year-old Christian community has come under increasing attack, with the most right-wing government in Israel's history emboldening extremists who have harassed clergy and vandalized religious property at a quickening pace. So as you can see, from the people, there is already some uptake in religious persecution towards Christians and towards Catholics who, of course, in regions where Christians are not the majority, the distinction hardly matters because the people see them as the same, right? So when these Jewish extremists go out and start persecuting people, they don't really care that this group's Protestant, this group's Orthodox, this group, or even, one of the groups is Mormon. All they see is, oh, you claim the name of Christ, and so they persecute you. So keep that in mind when we're going through these articles and conversations. The increase in anti-Christian incidents comes as the Israeli settler movement, galvanized by its allies and government, appears to have seized the moment to expand its enterprise in the contested capital. Excuse me. Quote, the frequency of these attacks, the aggressions, has become something new, end quote, Pizzaballa told the AP. Quote, these people feel they are protected, that the cultural and political atmosphere now can justify or tolerate actions against Christians, end quote. Pizzaballa's concerns appear to undercut Israel's stated commitment to the freedom of worship, enshrined in the declaration that marked its founding 75 years ago. The Israeli government stressed it prioritizes, religious freedom and relations with the churches, which have powerful links abroad. And for a long time, this has been mostly true. Now, again, it's never been true for the Messianic Jew that lives in Israel. The Messianic Jew has always had at least some form of persecution in the Holy Land, in so much as that the Israeli government and the chief rabbinate do not consider them to be legitimate Jews, and therefore they are not considered legitimate Jews under the law, right? Their children are not Jewish. If you are the children, even if you're an Orthodox Jew, if you are the children of a Messianic Jew, you have to go through some kind of an intense conversion thing, right? Excuse me. Otherwise, you're not actually considered to be Jewish, right? So at least to some extent, they've been lacking all along, but the Israeli government is made up of people. Obviously, we understand that people are going to display their fallen nature in Adam at certain points in time, right? But recently, it's been getting a little bit worse, and the reason it's been getting a little bit worse is because of a group that has recently taken a good deal of power that would consider themselves to be ultra-Orthodox Jews, and furthermore would consider themselves to be religious Zionists, right? Now, this in and of itself gets into dicey territory, because if you start laying out a lot of the things that the religious Zionists believe, you'd be inclined probably to agree with them. As far as should non-Jews be given citizenship, or should they be given a sort of resident stranger status like they had in biblical times? I think it's reasonable to give them a resident stranger status, right? Because it's the Jewish land. The same way I would say here that we have green cards, right? If you're not an American citizen, you can have a green card. You still have your human rights. You still have your court rights and stuff like that, right? But you're not a citizen of the country. Nothing wrong with that. They believe that Israelis should have the right to pray at the Temple Mount, their holiest site, to ascend the Temple Mount, their holiest site, right? Nothing wrong with that. Makes perfect sense. In fact, the opposite doesn't make any sense. How is it that you're not allowed to go up and pray at your most holy site? The Muslims are allowed to have complete dominance over that area, and it's their third holiest site. Makes no sense, right? They've been very supportive of uniting Jerusalem under the Israeli flag or of annexing Judea and Samaria. Makes perfect sense. They've been very supportive of having law based in halakha, which is to say Old Testament law that you get from the Tanakh, or as we call it, the Old Testament. Makes perfect sense, right? There's a lot of things. They want to ban abortions. They want to make sure that the sanctity of marriage is protected. They want to start fighting against the transgender movement. There's a lot of things that even more than your standard Israeli conservatives, I'm on board with them on. And in fact, in some ways, Meir Kahane, who is probably the figurehead of this far-right, quote-unquote, movement, he passed away in 1990 being assassinated in, fun fact, the first actual terrorist attack that Al-Qaeda ever committed on American soil. But he's kind of a political role model of mine in many ways. But he also had his faults, and one of those faults was a massive one at that, was that he had a disdain for outside religions coming into Israel and proselytizing. And of course, you can kind of even sympathize and see why, in so much as that he's a rabbi. He believes that he has been ordained by God to be a minister to the Jewish people. He descends, that name Kahana is a variation of the word Cohen, right? Which means he is a Levite. Fun fact, if you've ever met somebody with the last name Cohen, Kahana, Koch, right? These people are, what that name indicates, it's the Jewish word for priest, Cohen, right? These people are the descendants of the Levites. And we've actually been able to prove that genetically at this point, right? They share a common Y chromosomal ancestor 3,400 years ago. Well, if you know your Bible, then you know exactly who that person is. It's Levi, more than likely, or potentially it could be Aaron. It could be that they're all descendants of Aaron, right? Nevertheless, so he believes that he's been given a direct ordination of God to minister to his people, and he's even right about that. If you read your Bible, he's even right about that. The Levites are the tribe of that is meant to minister to the people, and the Aaronites even further are the specific subsect of that tribe who are meant to be the high priests, right? And what he sees here, because he doesn't believe Christ is Messiah, is people from outside faiths coming in and trying to take his people away from devoted worship to Yehovah. And so you can kind of sympathize with his hatred of outside proselytizers. The problem, of course, is that he's wrong, right? Doesn't matter how much I can sympathize with what he believes. He's incorrect. Jesus Christ is Messiah. And even beyond that, I think that the scripture is quite clear that one does need to do that which their conscience dictates. Also, you can't be telling people you're Jew, you're not Jew, right? Now, of course, I guess when I say scripture is clear in this element, I would be including the New Testament. He does not accept the New Testament. Nevertheless, you can see here why this becomes such a dicey issue, right? Because they're right on a lot of politics, and there's a lot of sympathy one can have for their reason for having a disdain towards Messianic Judaism and Christianity. And yet at the same time, we recognize that they're wrong about who Jesus is. He is the Messiah of their people. And so ultimately they are persecuting people who are adhering to their own Messiah, whom they refuse to recognize and who they will at some point, right? But also further, from a human rights perspective, if we believe that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, then that means they're actually violating a precept given by God that these people have a right to do what their conscience dictates, so long as as it pertains to their religious conviction. We also know that you don't have the authority to say Jew, not Jew, Jew, not Jew. They're all Jews, right? Ahab was still a Hebrew. Just because he was a bad Hebrew didn't mean anything. Paul the Apostle, still a Hebrew. Just because he was a Christian doesn't mean anything, right? Shimon Bar Kokhba, false Messiah, still a Hebrew. If a guy were to convert to Islam, still a Hebrew. It's an ethnic distinction. You descend from a certain tribal group, right? It's all very complex and complicated, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Is there is legitimate justification for these people to do what they're doing. And that's the worst kind of evil to exist. I believe it was C.S. Lewis who said there was no tyrant worse than the tyrant who tyrannizes you with the conviction of his own conscience. Because while the tyranny of the evil tyrant will cease at some point, the tyranny of the tyrant who thinks he does good never ceases, because he goes to bed thinking he's done what's righteous. I think it's also in Scripture where it says, Jesus Christ says that those who slay you will think that they are doing the work of God, right? So it's the same kind of idea. At any rate, all that context aside, these Kahanists now have power, and they're doing a lot of good. And they're also doing a lot of not so good. And one of the things they're doing that's not so good is they are proposing bills to make Christianity illegal in certain facets. They don't want public display of Christian symbols. They don't want public celebration of Christian holidays. And they don't want proselytizing to be legal. So it's still legal to be a Christian if these three laws were passed, which they were not, by the way. We'll get there. But nevertheless, severely clamped down upon. You can't share your faith with someone. You can't evangelize to someone. You can't display Christian symbols such as the cross. And you're not allowed to have public celebrations of Pentecost, Easter, Candlemas, Halloween, Christmas, etc. Right? So this is the situation that we have going on here that this guy Pizzaballa is talking about. And by the way, in case anybody's wondering, I'm not reading the live chat at the moment, but I assume somebody might be saying something along the lines of, can we really trust this guy? After all, he is a Roman Catholic, specifically a Roman Catholic priest, right? And we, of course, are well aware that the Roman Catholics have been trying to have some level of domination over the Holy Land for over 1,000 years at this point. See the Crusades, right? And we can trust this man, and I'll show you why we can trust this man in just a moment. It's not because he himself is trustworthy. It's because the information that comes out of his mouth is true. Benjamin Netanyahu has addressed this. There are bills that have been attempted to be passed addressing this. There is plenty of statistics which have been saying, no, actually, there is an uptake in persecutions going on here. And like I said, ever since the 1980s, it has been firmly established. Before then, it was just a general rule. But since the 1980s, it's been established by legal precedent that Messianic Jews are not Jews under Israeli law. That's your boy, right? Michael Brown, Jonathan Codd, Sid Roth. I don't want to endorse anything of Sid Roth, don't get me wrong, but nevertheless, he is a Jewish man. He's a Hebrew by blood. Because he claims the name of Christ, he would not be considered a Hebrew under Israeli law, which means he doesn't get citizenship rights if he were born there, and is just considered not Jewish, whatever that means. Like I said, it's completely ridiculous. It's like a Chinese person saying, oh, you're not a Buddhist, therefore you're not actually Chinese. Yeah, your parents are Chinese, your lineage is Chinese, but you're not Chinese because you don't seek enlightenment and going after nirvana or whatever. It's completely ridiculous. But at any rate, just note that and we always want to keep in mind that we don't want to be naive when it comes to the nefarious intentions of the Roman Catholic Church. They do want to internationalize the old city. They do want to have dominance over the internationalized old city themselves. They've been quite clear on that since 1995 when Shimon Peres met with the Pope at that time. I believe that was John Paul II, but I could be wrong about that. That doesn't mean everything they say is wrong. And in fact, the most dangerous rat poisons are those which are placed in a block of nice savory cheese, to quote my own work. Anyways, let's continue in the article here. Pizzaballa's concerns appear. All right. I already read that part. Quote, Israel's commitment to freedom of religion has been important to us forever, end quote, said Tanya Berg-Raphaeli, the director of the World Religions Department at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Quote, it's the case for all religions and all minorities that have free access to holy sites, end quote. But Christians say they feel authorities don't protect their sites from targeted attacks. And tensions have surged after an Israeli police raid on the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque compound set off outrage among Muslims and a regional confrontation last week, which that has more to do with the fight between so-called Palestinians and Israelis than it does any sort of persecution of Islam. The Israeli government is smart enough to realize that that they would be asking for war against all of their neighbors if they decided to start persecuting Muslims. At any rate, even though all of the Muslims around them seem to think that they're persecuting them anyway, which is not true, but whatever. Hostility toward minority Christians is nothing new in the teeming old city, a crucible of tensions that the Israeli government annexed in 1967. For those who don't know, the old city is ancient Jerusalem, David's city, Solomon's city, etc., right? There is a whole surrounding area, modern Jerusalem. It's all the same city, but it has since expanded. So the old city is all that stuff that was still around, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. And it's there where you'll find all the archaeological digs, there where you'll find the Temple Mount, as well as the Western Wall and Dome of the Rock, of course, right? Because those are all on the Temple Mount. It's there where you'll find the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's there where you'll find the recent digging ups of David's palace, if that does indeed happen to be David's palace, and so on and so forth, right? It's all there in the old city. But now Netanyahu's far-right government includes settler leaders in key roles, such as Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who holds criminal convictions from 2007 for an incident of anti-Arab racism and support for a Jewish militant group. Specifically, Ben-Gvir is the one who holds those convictions, in case my reading wasn't clear there, which I suspect with my stutter it might not have been. Their influence has empowered Israeli settlers seeking to entrench Jewish control of the occupied West Bank, that's Judea and Samaria, and East Jerusalem, alarming church leaders who see such efforts, including government plans to create a national park on the Mount of Olives, as a threat to the Christian presence in the Holy City. The Mount of Olives, of course, is a holy site for many Christians. Why? Because the Olivet Discourse that Jesus gave in Matthew 24 and elsewhere. So, creating a national park there would be basically building over this site that many Christians consider holy, in case anybody's curious why that would be a concern to Catholic and Christian leaders. Excuse me. So-called Palestinians claim East Jerusalem is the capital of their hoped-for state. Just to be clear, I am 1,000% against the establishment of Palestine as a state, but that's not the point of our article reading today. Although this uptake in hostility towards Christianity will be used as justification to establish a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, as well as Gaza and East Jerusalem, and will be used as an excuse to have the old city annexed and internationalized. Mark my words on that. This is all going perfectly according to plan. I'm not saying there are conspiratorial elements behind this, because I think that having conspiratorial elements behind something is not necessary for something to go according to like a grand scheme, so to speak, right? But these people are playing right into the hands of people like the Vatican who want to establish an internationalized city, or people like Mahmoud Abbas and the leaders of the Palestinian Liberation Organization who want to establish an Israeli state, or a Palestinian state. Quote, the right-wing elements are about to Judaize the old city and the other lands, and we feel nothing is holding them back now, end quote, said Father Don Binder, a pastor at St. George's Anglican Cathedral in Jerusalem. So, yes, he is called Father, but notice he is an Anglican, so this is not just the concern of Roman Catholics. Quote, churches have been the major stumbling block, end quote. The roughly 15,000 Christians in Jerusalem today, the majority of them Palestinians, were once 27,000 before hardships that followed the 1967 war spurred many in the traditionally prosperous group to emigrate. Now, 2023 is shaping up to be the worst year for Christians in a decade, according to Yusuf Tahir, from the Jerusalem Interchurch Center, a group that coordinates between the denominations. Physical assaults and harassment of clergy often go unreported, the center said. It has documented at least 7 serious cases of vandalism of church property since January to mid-March, a sharp increase from 6 anti-Christian cases recorded through 2022. So there were 6 in all of 2022. There's been 7 in the last 3 months, right? 3 months since this was published, which was in March. Church leaders blame Israeli extremists for most of them and say they fear further escalation. This escalation will bring more and more violence, end quote, Pizzaballa said. Quote, it will create a situation that will be very difficult to correct, end quote. In March, 2 Israelis burst into the basilica beside the Garden of Gethsemane, where the Virgin Mary is said to have been buried, which is kind of hilarious if you think about it, because they also believe that she was bodily assumed into heaven, but that's not even the point. They poured on a priest with a metal rod before being, pounced on a priest, with a metal rod before being arrested. In February, a religious American Jew, yanked a 10-foot rendering of Christ from its pedestal and smashed it on the floor, striking its face with a hammer a dozen times at the Church of the Flagellation. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. I'm sorry. On the Via della Rosa, along which it is believed Jesus hauled his cross toward the crucifixion. Quote, no idols in the holy city of Jerusalem, end quote, he yelled. And it does not stop there. Another article we'll be sharing here shows that there's more than just these elements of attacking or vandalism of religious holy sites, or the attempt to create national parks over religious holy sites, or even the occasional attacks on Christian priests. Christian and Catholic priests. I do consider Anglicans to be Christians, but Roman Catholic Church is a completely different, religion, in my opinion. Check this out. 2 Knesset members propose law banning spread of Christianity in Israel. This is from March of this year. I can tell you, thank the Lord, that the law did not pass this time around. But I want to emphasize this time around, because it could absolutely be something that is proposed again and is passed later on in the future. Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, is against this kind of stuff. He is a friend of Christianity, albeit not of the Messianic Jewish community, which, in my opinion, is completely ridiculous. I think that we should be talking absolutely more about Messianic Jewish rights in the state of Israel, because it is their land just as much as anybody else's. They are Jews. They are Hebrews. Okay. And for the record, they happen to be right, religiously speaking, at least in my opinion, right? But nevertheless, Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, and they are ethnic Jews, so they should have rights in the Jewish homeland. But at any rate, let's go ahead and move on to this article. I'm going to keep hammering on that for years to come, guys. Messianic Jews are not considered Jews under the Israeli government. That is not something that's okay. Now, obviously, we're all Americans. Most of us are Americans. I do have a couple people who watch this from outside of America. So what are we going to do about it? I guess there's not much, right? We're just talking about this and putting our hypothetical if I were voting here caps, right? But nevertheless, it is something that we should be speaking more about. We should be more supportive of. If we can support them financially, we should. If we can support them by way of activism, we should. And considering the fact that the United States government is an ally of Israel, we should be wanting the United States government to make that a priority. Hey, we want Messianic Jews to be considered Jews in the full-throated sense under the law in Israel. If we want a continued allyship, it's not a word, then that needs to be a priority, right? You want us to support Judea and Samaria being in your hands? You want us to support a unified Jerusalem? You want us to support even the resident stranger status that you give to certain Israelis and all that? Fine. Or to non-Israelis, rather? Fine. That all makes sense. We're down with that. On the flip side, we want Messianic Jews and Karaite Jews to be protected. We want the rights of Christian Gentiles to be protected. Their human rights. They don't need political rights if they're Gentiles. That's fine. Okay? We don't give political, or at least we shouldn't give political rights to non-Americans here. But nevertheless, human rights of non-Israelis need to be protected. Human rights of non-religious Jews need to be protected. Messianic Jews need to be considered Jews under the law in Israel. That needs to be a standard for us to be allies with this nation, right? And every country does this, by the way. This isn't some like we're going to lord our decisions over you, right? If the Saudi Arabian government is doing something that we disapprove of, we can tell them, hey, we don't want an alliance with you until you stop doing these things. Now, granted, we never do anymore for some reason. I don't know. I mean, we're just perfectly fine, it seems like, with the Saudi government stoning women for having the audacity to be gang raped by some vile pigs, as if it's their fault. But at any rate, I digress. And I'm kind of slurring a little bit. This is coffee, I promise you. It's not alcohol. Anyways, 2 Knesset members proposed law banning spread of Christianity in Israel. This was March 22nd, 2023. We're reading from Jordan News. Legislation, if passed, would send violators to prison for 1 to 2 years. So these members of the Knesset actually proposed spreading the gospel in Israel proposed a law that said spreading the gospel in Israel should have a legal punishment of 1 to 2 years in prison. Just consider that for a second, because that's literally persecution, right? It's not people dying, but it is literally state-endorsed persecution. Now, again, the law did not pass. Benjamin Netanyahu is an ally to Christians, specifically Gentile Christians. But the law was proposed, and it will be proposed again in the future. And when it's proposed again in the future, it will probably have more support than it does now, even if it doesn't get passed. The support is rising, in other words. Continuing. 2 members of the Israeli Knesset have introduced a bill that would ban all efforts to spread Christianity in the land where Jesus Christ was born, Jordan 24 reported. The bill, introduced just before Palm Sunday and Passover, 2 important holidays in the Christian calendar, threatened violators with imprisonment, according to the All Israel News outlet. The proposed legislation would ban all efforts by persons of one faith who wishes in any way to discuss or attempts to persuade adherents of other faiths to consider changing their current religious beliefs, according to the outlet. I'll say that again. The proposed legislation would ban, quote, all efforts by persons of one faith who wish in any way to discuss or attempts to persuade adherents of other faiths to consider changing their current religious beliefs, end quote, according to the outlet. The bill applies to people who have... might have been somewhat loud. The bill applies to people who have spiritual conversations with Israelis of any religion, and the penalty for violating this law would be 1 year in prison, and if the conversation is with a minor, 2 years in prison. Fun fact, it is already illegal to speak about your faith with minors in the nation of Israel. The bill was presented last week by Representative Moshe Gafni and Yaakov Ashar, ultra-Orthodox Jewish members of the United Torah Judaism Party, which have 7 seats out of 120 in the current Knesset. They're not the only religious extremist party that's there, though. The 2 deputies are part of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition, which consists of 64 seats. A warning against Christians, rather. In their official explanation of the bill, the 2 lawmakers emphasized a warning against Christians in particular. Apparently, the primary goal of the bill, according to All Israel News, is to make it illegal for followers of Christianity to encourage Jews to follow their religion, according to All Israel News. The production and dissemination of videos online explaining the Bible to Jews or Muslims in Israel would be illegal under the bill. The outlet stated that the draft law considers, quote, books, other printed literature, online articles, podcasts, or other forms of media that explains the life and ministry of Jesus and his message found in the New Testament to be illegal, end quote. The outlet said evangelical and Messianic Jewish leaders are concerned that the bill presented by Gafni and Asher could become law in the current Israeli political environment. Again, I want to emphasize this did not happen. It was shot down, okay? But there was a good deal of support for it. And again, it will be introduced again. Mark my words. I'm not a prophet. I'm not looking into my crystal ball, seeing the future. Oh, I foresee. That's not what's going on here, okay? But we can see the political waves and which direction they are going. And they're going to the right, okay? And in many ways, that's good. But in this particular way, it is not. They stated that in the 120-seat Knesset, the current government coalition is made up of a large number of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox members who are, quote, far more aggressive in the legislative session than ever before in pushing for legislation to be passed that advances their theological worldview, end quote. Potential criticism from Global Voices. The bill could cause widespread international condemnation of Netanyahu's far-right government, as well as a serious clash with evangelical Christians in the U.S. and around the world who are among Israel's biggest supporters. This quote says, free and democratic countries simply do not allow the free exchange of ideas. Okay, oh my goodness. Let me redo that. Free and democratic countries simply do not outlaw the free exchange of ideas, and that includes religious beliefs and convictions. 100% right. If we are a free nation, and if Israel is a free nation, we don't do that. By the way, brief tangent, this is something that concerns me about the current Christian nationalist movement in America. And again, much like the Kahanists in Israel, I agree with them on so much. But ultimately, it is not the state's job to make inside-outside distinctions as it pertains to a certain faith, nor is it the state's job to persecute a certain faith group because they don't agree with their convictions. It is not their job. Okay, look, there's a guy right now, Vivek Ramaswamy. I think Ramaswamy is his name. Might be Ramaswamy. I don't know. Anyways, he's an Indian Hindu. Well, he was born in America, but nevertheless, he's of Indian descent and he's a Hindu. And he's currently running for president of the United States on the Republican Party ticket. Obviously, we don't know a lot about him quite yet because the political session is only just about to start, right? He's got a lot of great ideas. But he's a Hindu. So yours truly will not be voting for him or supporting him, and it's because he's a Hindu. That is my biggest concern with him. I do not wish to be ruled by a pagan, okay? I think there's a certain level of judgment that indicates on a nation to be ruled by a pagan, even though he has very good ideas, okay? That being said, do I think he should be prevented from running for office or prevented from being a citizen or prevented from having citizens' rights like voting or prevented from even having human rights like being able to speak about his faith or practice his faith on the basis that he's a Hindu? No, I do not. And no, you should not. Okay? That kind of thinking is what led to Baptists being flogged in Virginia and Baptists being flogged in Massachusetts and Puritans being punished by the Church of England and the English monarchy and Anabaptists being drowned in France and in Germany and Michael Servetus being burned at the stake and Calvinists being burned at the stake by Catholics and Lutherans being burned at the stake by Catholics and the Hussites being burned at the stake by Catholics. You may notice the Catholics did a lot of it. That kind of persecution is what led to the Mormons having to flee to Utah. That kind of persecution is what led to the Christian church going through so much struggles in early Israel during the first century. That kind of persecution is what led to Ellen White saying that she believed Seventh-day Adventists would eventually be persecuted by Sunday worshipers. That kind of persecution is what led William Branham to say that he thought the denominational churches would get together and publish people who believed in the oneness of God, so on and so forth. Whether or not you believe what any of these, what any of these people were saying, I'm certainly not a Mormon, right? But I don't think they should be persecuted. And I recognize that persecution always turns around and falls on the heads of people who it wasn't originally intended to fall on the heads on. Calvinists have been persecuted. Baptists have been persecuted. Lutherans have been persecuted. Quakers have been persecuted. Anabaptists persecuted. Adventists persecuted. Pentecostals, oneness Pentecostals, Messianic Jews, everybody in this group eventually gets the hand of the state on their head. Everybody eventually gets slapped by the hand of the state, I guess is a better way to put it, right? Which is why we in America decided that's not what we want to do. Do we want a Christian nation? Of course. Part of being a Christian nation is that we don't persecute other religious groups. That doesn't mean that we support other religions, right? But we don't persecute them. Anyways, I'm going on a rant on Christian nationalism here because recently Doug Wilson said that he thinks the state will have to make inside-outside distinctions. No, 1,000 times no. Not the state's job. Not the state's job. It is our job as theologians and apologists to preach against that kind of stuff and to try and bring people to a genuine conviction in their hearts that Jesus Christ is Lord. Okay? It is not the job of the state to enforce that. Period. End of the conversation. Anyways, I'm digressing. Back to Israel. The reason I got on that digression is because it's not the job of any state to do that, including the Israeli state. Free and democratic countries simply do not outlaw the free exchange of ideas. Facts. That is a fact. People say, well, we want to go back to the good old days. You know what we didn't do in the good old days? Persecute people who disagreed with us. That was part of what made it the good old days. People want to say, well, yeah, but they're persecuting us now. Doesn't justify it. Turn the other cheek. We don't persecute them. That's what makes us better. And I don't mean as in we're better people. I mean as in our ideology is better. Conservatism wins because conservatism recognizes not only do we conserve that which is traditional, but we also don't punish people who disagree with the law, right? Anyways, I said digression aside 3 times. I mean it this time. The number of evangelical Christians around the world is estimated at about 600 million, of which 60 million are in the U.S., according to the World Evangelical Alliance. For the record, the World Evangelical Alliance is a pretty detestable organization, and I don't appreciate them. But nevertheless, they're just obviously giving a statistic of how many evangelicals exist in the world. Which I assume, with a number like 600 million, that must be all Protestants. They must be listing all Protestants as evangelicals, which I guess is true enough, at least. Anyways, the bill may also spark sharp criticism from both Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. Congress as an attempt to silence the followers of Jesus Christ in the Holy Land. Actually, I have not heard a single U.S. lawmaker bring this up. I could be ignorant, but I've not heard a single one bring this up. And I don't think that the Democratic Party is even interested, considering how much they don't appreciate Christianity here. But at any rate, the former U.S., I guess Sam Brownback did say something, but he's not even a current politician. He's a former politician. Anyways, the former U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, said that the new bill poses a massive threat to free speech, human rights, and religious freedom. Quote, and this is the quote we just read, free and democratic countries simply do not outlaw the free exchange of ideas, and that includes religious beliefs and convictions, end quote, Brownback said. So, if anybody was asking the question, I mean, how do we know that this Catholic guy isn't full of it? Well, here you go, right? There were actually bills being proposed that would make it illegal to proselytize in Israel. Now, again, I do want to stress they did end up falling through. In fact, here, I'll show you a brief article. I won't read the whole thing. But nevertheless, Benjamin Netanyahu came in clutch here. Israeli leader halts bill against Christian proselytizing. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday said he would prevent the passage of a proposal by a powerful ally in the governing coalition to punish Christian proselytizing with jail time. Look, Netanyahu has his problems, but the man is definitely the leader Israel needs at this moment. He's a strong leader. He's a competent leader. He's a deeply conservative leader. He is a leader who is both deeply supportive of the good elements of Kahanism as well as deeply against the negative elements of it. He is a non-persecutory leader. Every leader has their problems, but Benjamin Netanyahu is one I appreciate very much so, even though we have actually given some criticisms of him on this show for, he did take bribes, it seems. It seems like he is trying to prevent the government from, the judicial branch of the government in particular, from prosecuting him for that bribery, which is corrupt. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But even good men do corrupt things. I mean, just read the book of Samuel, and you'll see some of the things that David did, right? He even wrote Psalms apologizing for as much. At any rate, So this bill didn't pass. That is an important element of this conversation. The problem, though, is I think it is very possible that this bill could pass later in the future. And I'm 1,000% confident that it will at least be reintroduced. Okay? I want to show you the breakdown of the current Knesset, so you can see how many of these religious Zionists are currently in power. And again, I'm not even 100% opposed to religious Zionism. I agree with them on 95%. I think they are a perfect parallel to Christian nationalism here in America. I agree with them on somewhere between 95 and 99% of what they say. The things they don't say, or the things that they say that I don't agree with, though, are such a big deal. Such a big deal. Okay, so this is the breakdown of the current Israeli government. I don't know if you guys can actually see that. Let me see on my phone, because I know I have the little. Does that make it better? Man, there's a delay on the phone, so yeah, kinda. So it's in kind of the lower right-hand corner. I know it's probably going to be difficult for you guys to see it, but nevertheless, this is the breakdown of the current government, right? Now, for those who don't know, the way that parliamentary politics works is you don't vote for people, you vote for parties. And based on what percentage of the vote a certain party gets, that dictates what percentage of the Knesset or legislature or parliament, whatever you call it in your particular country, that dictates what percentage of that legislative body that party gets, right? And then what happens is the leading party, the party that won the most votes, tries to get other parties to sign on to its agenda by making political compromises, saying, hey, you do this, we'll do that, you do this, we'll do that, and thereby form a functioning government whereby over 50% of the legislative body is actually on board with the current government's agenda, right? There are some ways in which it is a brilliant system. One of the main ways being that it tends to temper whatever the ruling party's ideology is. So if the ruling party has certain things about them that are negative, which virtually every ruling party does in the history of human existence, then that ruling party will ultimately have to sacrifice some of that, preferably for more moderate sides. But sometimes it can go the other way. Sometimes the moderates are the ones who are actually compromising for the extremists, right? Now, you can see those who make up the government, which is the ruling part, right, the coalition, are Likud, Shas, the Religious Zionist Party, United Torah Judaism, Otzma Yehudit, and Noam, okay? Now, Likud is like Republicans, basically. They're your general conservative movement. You can see here it says National Liberal Movement, but they mean liberal in the classical sense, not in the modern political sense, right? They have the most seats in the Knesset with 32 and are therefore the ruling party in the coalition itself, as well as in the Knesset itself, right? Even though that's just barely over 1/4 of the Knesset. The next the next highest party, the next most populous party, right, in the government, which is the coalition, the ruling coalition, is Shas. What is Shas? Shas is a Haredi religious political party in Israel. Okay, so that's one of these religious bodies. What do they believe? Zionism, populism, social conservatism, religious conservatism, economic egalitarianism, Sephardic and Mizrahi interests. And they used to be non-Zionist, but that has since changed over time. So they basically wish to have a religiously Zionist nation, right? So that's 11 seats. Then you have the religious Zionists. Well, I don't think I necessarily have to explain that one. It's a far-right, ultra-nationalist, Jewish supremacist, and religious Zionist political party. That's another 7. So that's 18. United Torah Judaism is one of the two parties that actually proposed the bill we were just reading about. The other one being Otzma Yehudit, right? So that's another 7 plus another 6. There you go. That's 13. Now you're at 31. And then lastly, you have Noam, far-right religious Zionist political party in Israel. Their beliefs include, but are not limited to, religious Zionism, social conservatism, and anti-LGBT. So there you can have 32. So half of the government coalition, it's 32 Likud, 32 these other 5 religious Zionist parties. Half of the current coalition is made up of these people who wish to pass laws restricting Christian rights in Israel. Half of the religious party of the ruling coalition, in Israel is made up of these people who don't believe Messianic Jews should be considered Jews, who don't believe Christians should be allowed to proselytize, who don't believe that public celebration of Christianity should be allowed, so on and so forth. Okay, this is the most they've ever had in the history of Israel, right? In fact, if we show you guys the breakdown of the Knesset from just the last session, and let's see, I guess last election would be the best place to go. We can see here, this would actually be the election that gave us the current group. So one more. So just the election before this, you can see Shas, which has 11, only had 9, right? You can see Religious Zionist, which has 7, only had 6. You can see Noam, which is not even on this list. United Torah Judaism, still about the same, 7, right? So, I mean, let's just look. 9, 7, that puts you at 16. 22 for the Religious Zionist movement. And no, Noam. And there's another, what's the other group missing here? I literally just read it. Anyways, though, the point here being that they jumped from 22 to 32 just in the last elective cycle. Let's go ahead and look at the elective cycle before that. In 2020, Shas has 9, UTJ has 7, and the other groups are not even here. I think Yisrael B'Tenu is, no, they're secularist, okay? So Shas and UTJ are the only parties there. That is a total of 16. Yamina, are they Alliance of Right-Wing Parties that are originally included? No, they are also secular. So that's 16. So 16, 22, 32, do you see the trend? It's going up, right? The next elective cycle, it is likely that these religious Zionists will have more than 32. In fact, they may even be the ones to establish the ruling majority or potentially be the ones to establish the opposition, depending on how exactly it breaks down, right? So this is a growing threat in the Holy Land, a legitimate growing threat in the Holy Land, friends. Persecution is on the rise, and legislation to enforce that persecution is being proposed by a political body that is increasing in population and power, which of course tend to go hand in hand. And what makes it all the more complicated is that the religious Zionists are right about most things. They are right about Israel being the land of the Jews. They are right about Israel having a right to exist. They are right about Judea and Samaria belonging to them. They are right about the fact that Israel should not be beholden to a foreign nation. They are right about the fact that Jerusalem should be united under the Israeli flag. They are right about the fact that the abortion in Israel is way out of line and needs to be illegalized. They are right about the fact that the Torah should be the foundation for their law. They are right about so many different things. Like I said, 95 to 99% of things that they speak about, I am in complete agreement with. Meir Kahana, the guy who was considered the original religious Zionist in this vein, is a political role model of mine, right? They're right about most things. The things that they're not right about, though, are incredibly dangerous, friends, and could eventually lead to persecution of Messianic Jews and persecution of Christian Gentiles in the Holy Land. You just saw that there was a bill proposed to make such legal, and we've already since been telling you about the fact that Messianic Jews are not considered Jews under Israeli law. In fact, let me go ahead and demonstrate that to you guys real quick. We're going to get out of here pretty soon because I only like to go for an hour, and we've gone a little bit over an hour. Plus, I have a conversation to get to in an hour and a half with Dan Chapa on my other channel. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you guys here. Sorry about this. Just want to demonstrate to you guys what I've been saying about Messianic Jews is actually true. Should have had this pulled up already, Jay. Blah, 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 blah. This is a good article to read. Sorry, I'm trying to find an article that actually explains exactly what I'm trying to say here, which is difficult, unfortunately. Theology and core doctrines, religious practices, reception amongst Jews, responsive Israeli government. There we go. All right. Granted, this is from Wikipedia. It's not an actual article, but nevertheless, you can always follow the sources. Messianic Jews are considered eligible for the State of Israel's law return only if they can claim Jewish descent. Aliyah with a cat, a dog, and Jesus by Daphne Berman is the source for this, originally from Haaretz. It says, quote, in rejecting their petition, Supreme Court Justice Menachem Elon cited their belief in Jesus. In the last 2,000 years of history, the Jewish people have decided that Messianic Jews do not belong to the Jewish nation and have no right. I want you guys to hear this. This is a quote from the Supreme Court Justice Menachem Elon in a decision against Messianic Jews in Israel. He says, quote, in the last 2,000 years of history, the Jewish people have decided that Messianic Jews do not belong to the Jewish nation and have no right to force themselves on it, end quote. He wrote, concluding that those who believe in Jesus are in fact Christians. Okay? So what does it mean only if they can claim Jewish descent? Only if their mother was a Jew according to the rabbinate, which means an Orthodox Jew. If your mother was an Orthodox Jew, you are eligible for Israel's state law of return. You can be considered a Jew under Israeli law. Your kids cannot. And if it's your father or if it's a third generation or something like that, then you cannot. But nevertheless, you can see there is one potential loophole-ish. An assistant to one of the two lawyers involved with an April 2008 Supreme Court of Israel case explained to Jerusalem Post that Messianic Jews who are not Jewish according to Jewish rabbinic law, but who had sufficient Jewish descent to qualify under the law of return, could claim automatic new immigrant status and citizenship despite being Messianic. The state of Israel grants aliyah and citizenship to Jews and to those with Jewish parents or grandparents who are not considered Jews according to halakha, such as people who have a Jewish father but a non-Jewish mother. The old law had excluded any person who has been a Jew and has voluntarily changed his religion, and an Israeli Supreme Court decision in 1989 had ruled that Messianic Judaism constituted another religion. However, on April 16, 2008, the Supreme Court of Israel ruled in a case brought by a number of Messianic Jews with Jewish fathers and grandfathers. Their application for aliyah had been rejected on the grounds that they were Messianic Jews. The argument was made by the applicants that they had never been Jews according to halakha, and were not therefore excluded by the conversion clause. This argument was upheld in the ruling. Okay? Sources here, by the way, you have Justice in Israel, Jerusalem Institute of Justice. You have Messianic Jews to protest discrimination. And you have Messianic Jews claim victory in Israeli court, although I'm not really sure how exactly they could claim victory, considering that this is basically saying that they were, if you read between the lines here, right? Because what they're saying is, oh, well, our application status was accepted because you can't say we were converts. But what the court actually ruled, right? And this is why you guys always got to be careful to read between the lines. So the Supreme Court in every nation is always leaving the door open for some nonsense, right? And in this nation, it was quite the same. The argument was made by the applicants that they had never been Jews according to the Halakha and were not therefore excluded by the conversion clause. You see what I mean? So their own argument was we're not considered Jews under the Halakha, and the Jewish law states that you must be Jew under the Halakha in order to be eligible for the right of return. How this is a victory in any sense is baffling to me. It's like when people here in the United States went to the Supreme Court for it was like a gun thing in New York a couple years ago. I can't remember exactly what the law. I think it was not being able to conceal carry. And the argument was made that under current law, it was not illegal to. It was not constitutional to allow somebody or to disallow somebody to carry a firearm, but that such a law could be changed. And the only legitimate way for it to be changed, this is in the court documents, the only legitimate way for it to be changed would be to outlaw firearms, period. And people took that as a victory. It's amazing. At any rate, as you can see, Messianic Jews are not considered Jews under Israeli law. This here was from 2006, or excuse me, from originally from 2006. It was reposted in 2018, where Menachem Elon said, in the last 2,000 years of history, the Jewish people have decided that Messianic Jews do not belong to the Jewish nation. You only have citizenship in this nation if your mother was Jewish according to the Halakha, or grandmother, I guess, potentially. So this persecution to a limited extent already exists. And now you have 32 members of this religious Zionist movement who, again, are right about most things. And they are gaining popularity, went from 16 to 22 to 32 in the last 3 elective cycles, which, by the way, because of the incredible chaos in Israeli politics, that's since 2020. One election was in 2020, one was in 2021, and one was in 2022. Because they had constant dissolutions of their government, which means they had to have a new election. That's the way that's part of this parliamentary system. If you can't set up a government, if you can't set up a coalition, you got to have another election, right? So next time, 34, next time, 40, next time, 50, are they going to be the ruling party? And when they are the ruling group, are they going to start to give these proposals some actual teeth? I think yes. I think it's obvious that the answer is yes, unless something drastically changes. And I think one of those things that can change is we here in the United States of America can say, look, we're supportive of the nation of Israel. We are not going to support a group that does not allow Messianic Jews full legal political rights, full legal citizens' rights, full legal human rights. We're not going to support a nation that does not allow Gentiles free practice of their own faith, right? We wouldn't support that if France did it. We wouldn't support that if Ireland did it. We wouldn't support that if Canada did it. We're not going to support it when Israel does it. If you're going to be our ally, and you don't have to be our ally. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you're going to be our ally, that's not going to fly. That's at least one thing we can do. We can also continuously talk about it. We can support these people with our prayers. We can support these people financially if necessary. This is a real thing going on in Israel. It's a real thing going on in Israel. And while I won't read these articles, I would just like to show you 2 more, which are very important here. This one, despite Israeli restrictions, Christians celebrate Holy Flame. Notice despite Israeli restrictions. Why? I'll briefly read here. The Christians of Palestine celebrated the Sabbath. Palestine's not a real thing. Celebrated the Sabbath of light on Saturday and occupied East Jerusalem. It's not occupied. And this is one of the reasons why, like I said, it is a dicey situation because Palestine, not real, right? Occupied? No, it's Israeli land. But nevertheless, notice here, celebrated it in East Jerusalem, Gaza, and other Palestinian cities amid strict restrictions imposed by Israeli authorities. So there's a whole bunch of restrictions on whether or not they can actually celebrate this holy flame, right? So there's other problems here, in other words. And all of this is just to say, friends, this is a serious problem that I think we need to be aware of. I think we need to be in support of our Christian brethren who are in the state of Israel, especially those Messianic Jews, because it is one thing for them to say, you know, you're what would you call that? A Gentile, so you don't have full rights under this law of return. It's a completely different thing to say you as a Jew do not have full rights in the Jewish state because of your religion, right? That's completely ridiculous. At any rate, friends, we're done. We went a little bit over time here today, but I hope you appreciated this video. If you did like this video, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember to follow us on Rumble, where we have a backup account just in case we do ever end up getting banned from YouTube, which is very possible. Also, remember that you can follow us on various social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Minds, Parler, Truth Social, and Gab. And remember, if you would like to subscribe to the Patreon, you will get full access. It's $10 monthly. You will get full access to the Bloglodite blog, which is going to be posted every other Friday. This Friday, we are going to have another edition here. And I appreciate anybody who is interested in that blog. We're going to be speaking about how, and this was supposed to be published last weekend, but I decided to publish it this weekend now because I want this alternating schedule. At any rate, we're going to be speaking about how black quarterbacks in the NFL and the way the media deals with it is exemplary of American racism. Not woke, promise you. It's that title may sound like I'm going to start talking about how it's so racist that we don't have enough black quarterbacks. Exact opposite, actually. I think the fact that black quarterbacks are talked about as if that's a race issue is indicative of true racism in America, because nobody ever talks about the fact that there's only 2 or 3 white running backs in the league, or 2 or somewhere between 5 and 10 white wide receivers in the league. And people might say, Jay, it's football. Who cares? Well, first off, none of it's racist at all. It's just a matter of people who, if you aren't good enough to be a wide receiver, if there's more black people who are good enough than white people, that's fine. That's not racist, right? But the way the media deals with it is, oh, well, there's only X amount of black quarterbacks, therefore the league must be racist. And what my article is arguing is that is a microcosm of how race is treated in this country. We look at areas of the world, areas of the business world, areas of the religious world, areas of the political world, etc., where there isn't as many black people as white people, and we say, that's racist. But when we look at the flip side, nobody is arguing it's racist that there's only a couple white rappers. Nobody is arguing that it's racist that there's only a couple white wide receivers. Nobody is arguing that it's racist that, so on and so forth. So I'm taking NFL quarterback talk and saying this is a microcosm of the way race is dealt with in America. If you're interested in that article, subscribe to the Patreon, $10 monthly. You get full access to the Bloglodite blog, which is posted every other Friday. With that, friends, I want to remind you guys to be vigilant, think like Neanderthals, as we say here. And in the face of Armageddon, I want to ask you the question: will you compromise